brain and mind, who is the puppet and who the puppeteer? The question in the title has social, legal, and religious implications. If the mind controls the brain, then there's free will and its corollaries, dignity and responsibility. You are king in your skull-sized kingdom. You are the architect of your destiny. If, on the other hand, the brain controls the mind, an incendiary conclusion follows. There can be no free will, no praise, no punishment, no purgatory. I drink coffee in a junction in Sydney called Bondi Junction, and sometimes I ask people across from me whether they have free will. Well, last week I got a good answer. I do, but the other people don't. And Hippocrates was clear about the brain. Astoundingly modern view he expressed, men ought to know that from the brain and from the brain only arise our pleasures, joys, laughter, and jest, as well as our sorrows, pains, griefs, and tears. And of course, he had to argue against the heart there. And I wrote an article in a newspaper, The Conversation, electronic newspaper. I love you from the bottom of my brain. And of course, on Valentine's Day, you might consider something more accurate to send to your friends. And as much as, after so much battle to localize the seat of the soul, psychology loses its soul in the 1930s. And so souls may exist, but psychology has no need for them. They are superfluous, surplus to requirements. And Hebb says the mind is the integration of the activity of the brain. There is no ghost in the machine, says a philosopher, Patricia Churchland. And according to many neuroscientists, you don't need to invoke soul to understand and to change behavior. And Skinner was one of them, and who also argued that there can be no free will, given that behavior is the outcome of two factors and only: the genetic endowment and the environment that works on that genetic endowment. I will explore the issue of who is the puppet by considering what some neuroscientists think about awareness, consciousness, the mind, and free will. And we heard earlier the heart problem. Indeed, the best term to describe neuroscientists who study consciousness is puzzled. In contrast to the impasse with consciousness, many of them are quite clear. The mind is the activity of the brain, and behavior is the outcome of two influences: genetic endowment and experience, nature and nurture. That means experience sculpts your character from the genetic material you are granted, much as Praxiteles sculpted Hermes out of a block of marble. It means further that because you have no choice of parents or the society you're born in, no choice of nature or nurture, you cannot have free will. Matter becomes conscious of its own existence. Sensation, perception, and consciousness are totally dependent on the brain. Consciousness or phenomenal awareness is the inner mental life. It is what it feels like when someone experiences love, hate, lust, jealousy, or the colors of the rainbow. It is believed an organism needs many neurons before awareness can arise, and even more neurons and interconnections before consciousness can arise. As though by magic, as was said earlier, if you have enough neurons, you can have consciousness and fall in love. The greater the complexity of the nervous system, the more complex the repertoire of conscious states. Even within your own lifespan, you are more conscious when you're concentrating on a lecture and less when you are falling asleep, on where you're an embryo or dementing. Christoph Koch studied consciousness through its proxies, the neuronal pathways that are responsible for it. Neuroscientists suspect factors that enable consciousness to be pathways that broadcast to the cortex, such as serotonin or adrenaline, acetylcholine, and dopamine neuronal groups. However, science has failed to answer the basic question: how 1.3 kilograms of neurons and supporting cast of glial cells produce subjective experience, how matter becomes conscious of its own existence. But before you rush to the temples nearby and murky metaphysics and surrender your logic to gods, read what some neuroscientists say about free will and whether the mind can influence the brain. Is there free will? All subjective experience tells us that we have free will, but most of the scientific evidence speaks against it. Koch says you could demonstrate free will if under identical circumstances you could have behaved differently. Identical refers not only to external circumstances, but also in internal brain states. It seems there's no free will in the domain of romantic love. In the words of Carmen in the opera by the same name, l'amour, il n'a jamais connu les lois. Love has never known the law. And in Greek, you might have come across songs such as «Μέχρι που σκέπτομαι να κόψω το τσιγάρο για να σε βγάλω μια στιγμή από το μυαλό». I'm even thinking of quitting smoking to get you out of my mind, because she had given him a cigarette holder. There are far more important reasons to give up smoking. Some scorned lovers state emphatically they want to lose their love but cannot. They keep loving someone who has abandoned them or is even abusive to them. Some are more capable of committing suicide than switching their affection from the one who does not love them to the one who does love them. This absence of free will in emotion is consistent with Voltaire's more encompassing comment, I can't help wanting what I do want. Our brain is the riverbed that holds and channels our stream of consciousness. It is molded by the family and the culture we're raised in. There's nothing left for free will to explain once you account for nature, nurture, and random influences on behavior. If so, this would render us passive observers of the thoughts and emotions that the brain parades for us, with no crack for free will to elbow in and join the parade. From the above hypothesis follows the prediction: any of us raised in Afghanistan would be equally likely to stone a woman for allegedly burning the Quran as any Afghan now. Can the mind influence the brain? The mind cannot be an agent that will interfere with the activity of the brain. The mind is the activity of the brain. Indeed, one line of research suggests it is not the mind that decides and informs the brain, but the brain that decides and informs the mind. This has been disputed by some people, but there might be some truth to it. The readiness potential reflects the preparatory phase of a response and occurs about 0.35 seconds before we become aware of wanting to make the response. So the brain decides in neural darkness and then informs the mind that thinks it made the decision. In fact, the decision was made precognitively. Indeed, if the mind were to force brain neurons to fire, it would violate the principle of conservation of energy. It cannot inhibit some neurons here, poke some neurons over there. Where would it find the energy? If the brain controls the mind, then there is no free will, because the brain connections, neurotransmitters, and synapses will make the decision, and this decision will be based only on events that are physical, chemical, electrical, or random. As it happens, even freedom of thought seems not to exist. you can no more predict your own next three thoughts than my next three thoughts. Harris. Neither can you look at the rainbow and force your brain to see it in black and white. By the way, by knowing that the rainbow is just different wavelengths of light reflecting differently, does not make it any less pretty. Alzheimer's disease will pay an unwelcome visit to most of us at the end of our life. It will disrupt the internal structure of our neurons, and we will be living evidence the mind is the product of the brain and has no influence on it. The 19th century poet Lord Alfred Tennyson was half right when he wrote in Ulysses, "I am a part of all that I have met. The other half, the rest of the truth, lies in genetics." You cannot abandon love that torments you. You are easier than any easier than you can shut off pain after surgery. Much as your shadow cannot force you to do something, the mind cannot make the brain do its bidding. Which one of us would not like to discard our depression, anxieties, obsessions, compulsions? It seems the puppet cannot choreograph the puppeteer. First conclusion, neuroscientists agree genes confer predilections. Many consider the environment is the only sculptor of behavior. If only we could abandon our undesirable desires, our depression, our obsession, our compulsions, our unrequited love. If only we were the authors of our thoughts and not mere observers of what the brain presents us. If only the puppet could get hold of one of the strings with which the brain makes it dance. It seems the puppet is free only in as much as it loves its strings. Second conclusion, Jacques Monod, this is Greek, mentioned that the loneliness of humans. Humans live at the edge of an alien world, a world which is deaf to their music, even to bouzouki. And it is equally indifferent to their hopes as to their pain and to their crimes. According to some scientists, humans, and I refer here to Wilson, he says part of this, E.O. Wilson, humans face this world without a soul, without free will, with Paleolithic emotions, and with godlike technology that threatens their own existence and that of the other living creatures. I hope that armed with the truth, to know thyself, that is, that we are animals, and having set our stern at the dawn and not at the grave of our children, we might make wings of our oars. And the third conclusion here of what happens with the hubris of Aethon, and who took control of the sun, and what Zeus did to him, and what might happen to us. And the third conclusion is part of this, that indeed, as Chairman mentioned, I did write a novel which goes into some details in some of these things. Thank you for listening.